Hey folks, we're here at kind of a twilight hours near the end of the day, and we're going to be doing some optic testing. This is low power variable optics, and I'm testing two different scopes. One is primary arms Acss. This is 1 to 8 by 24, and we're going to be looking at an optics board just like this one, and it is at 100 yards downrange. And I've got a protocol set up. I used this protocol once before for another scope test that we did. I'm going to be running essentially the same test, and we're going to be comparing a second low power variable optic. This is a Schmidt Bender 1.5 to 8 power by 26. Notice 2 millimeter larger, so that will give it some advantage. This is the PM2 ShortDot CQB, and we're going to test it as well. Two evaluators, my son and myself, are going to be doing this, and we'll see how these stack up. Now, I will say, this is about a $2,000 scope, about $1,800, and this one, primary arms, is quite a bit less. I think it's about $300–400. We'll get the price right and put it into the description. But what I'm doing here, I have the Acss mounted already using an old Ruger 1022 stock that I converted just for this purpose. Put a Picatinny on it. We're going to be swapping the scopes on and off. So let's go ahead and get started before we run out of light completely. All items in the zone must be clear to receive that zone's score. Clear is defined as, you can see the correct number of bars, all items crisp and without fuzziness, seeing the minus if it's appropriate, seeing spaces between objects. So we're at 8 power here. I'm actually going to move the reticle away so I can have a chance to see this board. Well, I can see the number 1 super clear. 2, 3, 4. I really cannot discern if that's a 5 or a 6. I know it's a 5 just because it's counting. But that okay, I can see right where my break is. Now the qualitative assessment on this one. Edge-to-edge clarity, again at full power. Now that's quite good. Assess the eye box. Okay, is it touchy? So as I go here, I move. Okay, I get black pretty quick. I'm clear. It's not too bad. Yeah, that's pretty good, actually. How bright is the optic? So I'm going to use both eyes on this one. I'm going to turn it down to low power so I can do this comparison. Yeah, it's brighter than daylight. Okay. Just general crispness. Again at high power. The general crispness is okay. Okay, we just finished our test with the Acss. I'm going to remove this. I like to use these ADM Picatinny quick detach mounts. Are really nice for this exact purpose, really, if you need to move a scope off or remove one quickly. Okay, and now we're going to mount the Schmidt Bender PM2. Again, I'm using ADM mounts. Okay, so it's taking us about 5 minutes per. I can clearly see that number 4 in block 2. Okay. Edge to edge clarity at high power. And I'm moving my eye around. Oh, that's looking very good. And at high power, we'll assess the eye box. It starts to narrow. Boy, I can go quite a ways out though and still see a good sight picture. Now this is not a quantitative test, it's qualitative, but it's pretty generous. Now I have to reduce it to low power, 1.5, and I'm going to take a look at the ambient light conditions. I like to look at the sky here and see if it's brighter, and it is. It's definitely brighter through the scope. The colors seem very true to me. Now, by the way, it's 4:56, and at 16:56, at 1700 or 5 o'clock, it's officially sunset. So we're right about shooting, well, not shooting, but doing this evaluation at sunset. Okay, back up to high power. I want to look at crispness of stuff. Oh yeah. Oh yes, very good, very crisp. Now those controls are absolutely sure. Very nice. Now what's interesting on this 1.5 power CQB scope is when you put it down to 1.5 power, I mean not all the way at 8 power, but when you put it down to the 1.5 power, those reticles darn near disappear. So a person could be thinking, I don't like that. I can't even see my reticles. But that, I'm sure, is by design, because these are, you have an illuminated red dot here. So effectively, this scope is acting like a red dot at 1.5 power, and then at a normal rifle scope at higher powers. And by the way, this is a first focal plane scope. So as I turn on my illuminator at this light condition number 4, I'm starting to see the red dot, and of course it gets brighter and brighter and brighter, all the way up to a setting of 11. And now, you know, I would just be using that red dot, put it on target. I don't need to see those reticles, and that I think is really a real kind of a, it's kind of a neat innovation. You know, I wanted to spend just a couple minutes on a wrap-up of what we just evaluated. Now here you get a quick, better view of the old 1022 stock that I modified with this Picatinny rail, just for this purpose of evaluating some optics kind of quickly. You know, the Acss did not do bad. I looked at our video that we recorded, posted a couple of years ago, watched it over again, and there's nothing that I can say today that's going to change my evaluation of it at that time. It's a pretty good scope, quite a good scope actually. And the both quantitative and qualitative assessment that we did out at the range kind of reflects very closely to what we saw, what I evaluated a couple of years ago with that video. Now the overall scores for the Acss were that I gave a final score of 4 for the quantitative test. Now that's out of a total score possible of about 25. It actually could be higher than 25, so that doesn't sound too good. I got a 4 out of 25. Well, the only way you're going to get a 24, 25 type of score is if you're able to see these absolutely tiny features in this optics board, which is pretty much impossible at 100 yards with a 8 power scope. Really what we're hoping for is that we could get maybe as high as a 14, a 10, 13, 14, somewhere in that range there. That indicates that you're in that range kind of where you should be with this distance and the magnification of the scope and those rather challenging light conditions. The qualitative assessment or subjective, a lot of people kind of poo-poo that because we can't put numbers to it. But it's also very important. How do you like that scope? How does it suit your eye? And these sorts of things. How bright is the optic? I found that it was brighter than ambient conditions. In other words, it gathered light for me and made the target look a little bit brighter than under ambient conditions. Now, I did not detect any discoloration in the scope. My son said he saw just a little bit of an orangish type of color, so that the white color of the optics board, some of that brighter colored soil, took on a little bit more of an orange hue to it. His overall quantitative score was a 10. He was able to see some of those features in a smaller box than I was able to see. And that's the ACSS. The Schmidt Bender did quite well. It's a very impressive scope. And my quantitative score for the Schmidt Bender was a full 10. And my son gave it a 9, actually a little bit lower quantitative score than he gave to the ACSS. I see my son noted that the eye box was much better than the ACSS. I also found that the Schmidt Bender was brighter than ambient conditions, very crisp details. There was a clay pigeon on the soil on that berm behind the target, and I could see the details of that clay pigeon, the little rings around it with the Schmidt Bender. I couldn't see those details with the ACSS, and these were being evaluated at high power, 8 power. I'll also note that specifically my son found that the controls of the Schmidt Bender were more sure, more certain than on the ACSS. You know, in reality, the ACSS is a good scope, as I said earlier, but the show goes to the Schmidt Bender. It's kind of a hands-down decision. In each criteria that we evaluated, the Schmidt Bender was either quite a bit better or better than the ACSS, save for the quantitative assessment that my son did, where the ACSS edged it out just a little bit. I will also note that we were shooting under twilight conditions. We gave the ACSS kind of first dibs, a little bit brighter conditions, and then we evaluated it with the Schmidt Bender. The other consideration, of course, that I don't think anyone can ignore is the difference in price. $389 for the ACSS, let's say about $400, and about $1,800 for the Schmidt Bender. Now, how does one justify that? Are you simply paying for the big name, the Schmidt and Bender? I don't think so. I think here's what's happening. There's a management saying of reject perfection. And the way that came about was due to the extremely high cost of going from about 90% good, 95% even very good, up to 99.9% or 100% perfection. The cost necessary to go there to perfection is extremely high. There is really no room for impurities in the glass, use of inferior materials, etc., etc., etc. And the Schmidt Bender scopes really approach that level of perfection. Very, very, very good scopes, no doubt about that. For me, I really appreciate that the Schmidt Bender scopes. I have a couple of those now, and I can clearly tell that I'm able to discern my target a whole lot better. I think I shoot better because I'm using better optics. And when I switch to a lower quality optic, let's say I have a number of vortex scopes as well. And those are good scopes as well, but they really don't compare to the Schmidt Bender. It's a completely different class of scope. Now, the ACSS is at least as good as a vortex, and probably for this type of low power variable optic, I would easily put the ACSS above vortex. When it comes down to a final decision point, for me, it's clear that the Schmidt Bender is a superior scope. It's the better scope. I bought both of these scopes, and you know, that I'm not dinging on the Primary Arms ACSS and saying it's a bad scope. By far, it's not a bad scope at all. It's a good scope. It's a good choice for a low power variable optic. But I think I'd be unfair, or actually lying, if I was going to say, oh, it's just as good. You know, you can get such a high quality glass and high quality everything for $400. You don't have to pay the $1,800. That would be very misleading of me to say that. So there we have it, my 2 cents on a couple of very nice low power variable optics. Thanks for watching.